Next, we'll get started right away with HB 1580, and I'll ask Representative Wheeler to come up. Against. Okay, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Janigian and colleagues on the House Ways and Means Committee. I represent the towns of Peterborough and Sharon. My name is Representative Jonah Orion Wheeler, and I am here today before you to introduce House Bill 1580. House Bill 1580 is legislation which would impose a 0.75% surcharge tax on any non-primary residence valued over $500,000 in the state. That isn't, now non-primary residence is defined in statute as a residence that isn't occupied more than 180 days out of the year. So any home in this state that isn't occupied more than 180 days out of the year that's valued at over $500,000 would face a 0.75% surcharge tax. So a home at $500,000 would pay $37.50 in this additional surcharge tax. The reasoning behind this is, as I'm sure you will all hear a lot over the course of this next few months in this 2026 session, the rising property taxes. The rising property taxes in our state are pricing people out of their homes. I proposed this legislation after going around my district in the summertime and hearing pretty much that from constituents of mine across Peterborough and Sharon. People I think of specifically my neighbor from the house which I just moved away from, who had lived in that house since she was 1 year old, born and raised in that house, raised her children in that house, but is having to face the reality that she might have to leave because she cannot afford to live in New Hampshire any longer. And Mr. Chairman, I proposed this legislation because there are houses in our state owned by people who have a significant amount of money who aren't living in those homes. And I am, I do my best not to be a typical liberal, but in this instance, I think that we do have to address a situation where these homes are left empty and people are not contributing back to the communities in which they are residing in. At the same time, while the people who spend 365 days out of the year are having to be priced out. So I proposed this as a way to start the conversation going, to look at other places where we can find revenue as a state and try and relieve the burden from the municipalities and citizens who have proposed and told us about the rising property taxes here in this state. So all money raised under this bill, I have earmarked to go back to the municipality in which it was raised. I didn't want any games to be played with the money raised by this tax if it were to be signed into law. I didn't want any general fund games to be played. I wanted this money to be used directly for what the intent was for, which is relieving our citizens of the burden that they're having right here today. So you have a lot of testimony before you. There's a lot of people who have signed up on this piece of legislation to talk in opposition to it, and that's good, and I'm looking forward to hearing from it. So with that, I will leave you as brief as I could. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And another quick question from Representative Elman.
Very quick question. What is an SRTR? It's
Yeah, a short-term rental. Is that in the bill?
short-term rental. Thank you.
Representative Schamberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Wheeler, for taking this question. When you mentioned the 183 days, does it have to be consecutive days?
As far as I understand, and it's 180, I do not believe that it does. No.
Representative Spar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. there are communities across our country where we're seeing the challenge of residential housing because they are being sucked up by investors who are using short-term rentals, or they're being bought by second homeowners who leave them empty for 8, 9, 10 months a year, use it for a few months. I see it all along the coast. We see it in a lot of the ski areas. And one of the things that was interesting is the Supreme Court upheld a law where the millage that is charged along the coast, and this is in the state of Maine, they can charge more to coastal properties than non-coastal. So if you're inland, your millage is different. So there is a difference there. And this sounds like it's very similar to that. Instead of being able to say by location, you're saying by the use of the property. So it's creative. And I guess my question to you is there any issue with being able to make sure that that's used for that purpose for second home? That's essentially what you're doing, is for second home people. Is there any sort of problem there as far as you see?
No, I wrote the bill as best I could to avoid going after, if somebody had a home that they own, second home that they own, that they rented out as a duplex, that home would be resided in more than 183 days out of the year, assuming. And so that wouldn't be taxed under this surcharge. The intent of this legislation was exactly that. I mean, we're looking at a situation where all these homes that are being bought up are being left empty, and that home could be used for somebody who could purchase a $500,000 home and use it as their primary residence. And I said in my testimony, if you can afford to have a second home over $500,000 that you don't reside in more than 183 days out of the year, then I think you can afford a 0.75% surcharge tax on that home, because the people who spend 365 days of the year here in this state can't afford to spend time here in this state. So,
Representative Almy, did you have another question? Okay. Yes, Representative Ohm.
Yeah, thank you very much for your testimony. I'd like to just bring up an issue that somebody might object to who owned a second home, and say that, well, I'm not here half the year. I'm probably not using a lot of city services. I probably don't have my kids in school. So why am I being charged more money than somebody who is living here and demanding more city services?
it's a great question, Representative Ohm, and it's a sensible question as well. My response to that person would be, you are not using the same amount of city services as somebody who is there 365 days out of the year, but you're also taking up a piece of property in the community in which somebody else could be residing for 365 days out of the year, which in effect, as property taxes were when they were first passed, it was about the fact that properties were places where value was generated. And I think that similarly, hundreds of years later, we're looking at a situation where some of these properties that are being taxed with the normal property tax are not being used or utilized in any way. And I think a property that sits empty and isn't being used for its full value should face that additional surcharge tax.
Representative Opal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a follow-up to that question, if I own a second home and I'm not living in it 183 days a year, I would still expect, I think, would you agree, that if the house caught on fire, that the local fire department would respond, that if there were an issue of a burglary, that the police department would respond, that some of these services are still going to be, my expectation is still that I'm going to receive those services. Is that your thinking as well, Representative?
I would hope if the house was on fire that the fire people would come, that the fire department would come and the rest. So yes, absolutely, that would be my assumption. Just because a house isn't resided in doesn't mean that it doesn't get covered by the services which would protect that property. It's a great question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing no more questions, thank you for your testimony.
Chairman?
Okay, one more question.
All right. Yeah, just very briefly.
You don't want to get in trouble.
Don't worry, this is brief. So thank you for taking my question,
you.
Representative. For these houses that are being rented, as you referenced, aren't they already paying more taxes because they're paying both property taxes and meals and rentals taxes?
Some people pay multiple taxes. I think that in the situation where you own a second home that isn't being resided in more than 183 days out of the year, that you should pay the additional surcharge tax. And as far as I understand your question, if somebody was living in that home for more than 183 days out of the year, that it wouldn't apply to this tax. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Wheeler.
Thank you, Chairman Janigian and members of the House Ways and Means Committee.
Next, I have Representative Rung.